Hello everyone, this is Ryan from the YIMBY Arts Project. So, today I'll be talking about UBI, Universal Basic Income. And I'll be arguing in favor of it. Right now, if you look around at what's going on, coronavirus, lockdown, 40% of businesses are being projected to close, which will likely result in up to 20% unemployment. Even the big companies are kind of like bracing themselves for this kind of big crisis that is about to happen over the course of this year. So what do we do about that, right? Part of the reason why we're facing so many problems is that for a long time we haven't been adapting to the new economy very well, especially digitally. So UBI was actually a idea that has been proposed many times before as a way to weather these types of crises, and I do think right now is the time to do it. So, just real quick, what is the advantages of this compared to other solutions out there? One, it's fair because it's universal. This saves the government the trouble of having to judge people whether or not they deserve the money, right? That's something like conservatives and even libertarians, they do not like about the government. The other one is very progressive because it's similar to a flat tax where everybody gets a fixed $1,000 a month. That's Andrew Yang's thing. And because it's fixed, the benefits actually stack on the bottom and then get less and less as you go up, right? It's very progressive. And lastly, it's very efficient because compared to big government, like bureaucratic systems, this is just the government literally sending everyone a check directly. It's so simple. And you don't have to hire hundreds and hundreds of people to keep the machine running. So this is part of the reason why it often has bipartisan support, even among people who normally are skeptical of government programs. So that's my argument. Looking forward to hearing back. Okay, thanks.
Anytime there's a fiasco facing a nation, interventions propose installing more government programs. Unfortunately, Ryan, adhering to the Rahm Emanuel school of thought of never letting a crisis go to waste won't work this time around. And here's why. Advocates of a universal basic income are applying this technique to the coronavirus public health crisis, recommending guaranteed money to weather the economic storm cloud that hang over the United States and global economies. To advance the cause of a guaranteed minimum income, economic projections are often utilized to justify instituting this public progressive measure. As you say, the forecast suggested 20% unemployment and 40% of businesses shutting down. First, the jobless rate fell short of these estimates, declining to just over 30% in May. Second, why would 40% of companies, if that's accurate, close their doors? It is because of a statist one-size-fits-all approach to mitigating COVID-19. We have seen the power of the U.S. economy, even with only partial reopenings, and it's been rather impressive to say the least so far. Is the UBI fair because it's universal? It's actually unfair because the next generations will ultimately foot the enormous bill that would come with imposing a costly basic income. Much like how millennials and Generation Z will pay for the insolvent Ponzi scheme Social Security program. The UBI is a progressive initiative like any other government tax or public benefit. If you use the Andrew Yang's model of $1,000 per month, it would eventually balloon to $1,500, $2,000. This is an inevitable consequence of a big government scheme, since the printing press would be required to run 24/7 to help cover the tab, resulting in higher price inflation. It is true that a UBI would be more efficient than the current system we have in place. However, UBI does not replace the entire welfare state. Even Yang's proposal would not ditch the largesse of the present Leviathan. It would only serve as a complement. The idea did start as a full replacement, but the left soon demanded that it be coupled with the astronomical $1 trillion welfare state that's currently in place. From a libertarian perspective, no welfare is the best public policy. From a realpolitik perspective, the UBI is only feasible and workable if it takes an axe to what the US has now. If it is another layer to the costly and immense welfare state, then you're still stuck with a broke Uncle Sam extending his hand out for a bailout. Thank you.
Okay, so I've gotten the counterpoints from Andrew. Thank you for that. So I'll just address them one by one. This is a little bit paraphrased, but I hope I covered most of it. One is that he seemed to be concerned about the political feasibility of universal basic income. So he called it realpolitik. If you do not believe in a social safety net at all, then there's probably not any point in having this conversation to begin with. But if you do, I would say that UBI is still the best possible, program that we have. One, it applies to everyone. There's no judging by the government of who gets the money or not. It goes to everyone, and it is progressive because it scales upwards and it becomes less useful as the richer you get. So it's naturally progressive as opposed to like people making decisions about who gets what. So there's that. It's actually more politically feasible than you think. Like in the Yang Gang, we have a lot of libertarians. We have actually a lot of conservatives, or people who used to identify as conservatives. So it's more popular than you think. A lot of times it doesn't show up in the polls, but during the primaries, there was a couple polls that showed that up to 50% was actually in support of UBI. I think now I've seen a few which is high as 60 or 70, just because of all the economic uncertainty that's happening right now. You can when people have trouble putting food on the table, a lot of the ideals kind of go out of the window, and I do think we're kind of at that point right now. The riots are a very clear indicator that something is wrong. So going on to the next point is that he was concerned about the cost. So the cost is, if you've been following the Andrew Yang model, you might not be looking at the same things that I have, but the Andrew Yang model is basically that it's going to be paid by a value added tax. So you might disagree with it in principle, but the solution to paying for UBI is not printing more money. So we are actually recirculating the money that exists within the ecosystem already. So there should not be that much inflation. There'll be a little bit, but not that much, not to the point where a spiral out of control. So, and last, he was concerned about government expansion. So he thought that the $1,000 a month is going to turn into 1.5 or 2 or 5 or 600 million. It is if you're like on that side of the spectrum, the idea of like the government expanding indefinitely is kind of a concern. But I do think that because the reason this was enacted to begin with, which is really like an emergency cash infusion, just to keep people's heads out of the water, right? Like you can't get rich off of UBI. Like it's not a wealth generation machine. The wealth generation machine is home ownership, actually. But that's a different topic. Like a lot of younger people have been left out of that machine, which is kind of why everybody's a little bit cranky, well, like the technical way of describing it is that wages have not kept up with living costs. And this is like a very clear trend that has been going on for years, and it's going to get worse as automation starts to replace traditional jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. So we need people. UBI was designed by some very smart people, to sort of hold over the population during these times of change, which is really right now, I would argue. So that's basically my argument. Thanks for hearing me out, and looking forward to talking further. So take care.
Thank you, Ryan. Much appreciated. One of the things that was great about the Yang Gang was its intellectual diversity and open to discussing new ideas as opposed to shutting them down, which seems to be in vogue these days. One of my favorite players to the Boston Red Sox, Rafael Devers, attended a Yang rally last year, so that was fun. That said, you are correct that a UBI is a popular idea. If there's a public policy of offering everyone free money, you can bet that most people would be in support of the program. While public policy polling is useful for the politicians who want to centrally plan society and try to find a new way of being Santa Claus, majority rule is not exactly the most liberty-oriented idea. That said, I wouldn't besmirch the character of people who took the free money. Economist Milton Friedman never lambasted people who on welfare or those who took advantage of the welfare system, but rather the welfare system and the bureaucrats instead. I do agree that riots indicate that something is wrong in society today, but it may not be food insecurity or having trouble putting food on the table or anything of that nature. If that were the case, rioters would be looting supermarkets for hams and Beyond Meat hamburgers, not 60-inch flat screen televisions at Target or Walmart. When it comes to paying for a UBI, there are two things I will address. The first is that the VAT is one of the most egregious forms of taxation because it is taking while the victim is not looking. It is another form of a national sales tax, but it is concealed at each step of the production process, from farming to manufacturing to sales. That inevitably raises prices and thus the cost of living, which you and I both agree is a concern in society today. Also, what happens if there is another recession or steep economic downturn? What if commerce and production come to a screeching halt like it has been in 2020 due to the coronavirus pandemic? Should the VAT fall short of meeting the cost of UBI as well as other welfare programs, because let's face it, the government will tap that revenue for other pet projects and government schemes, the state needs to find a way to cover the cost. Therefore, the state will utilize a wide variety of surreptitious funding measures, borrowing credit markets or tapping the printing press of the Federal Reserve. Considering the state of government, it would not surprise me at all if politicians ever wanted to raise a UBI or any of the welfare scheme to $600 million. But in all seriousness, if you look at U.S. Census Bureau data over the last 50 years, Americans' earning power has actually increased as the percentage of Americans earning $100,000 or more annually has tripled since 1967. In 2018, nearly 1 out of 3 households, or 39 million households, had annual incomes of about $100,000 or more in terms of real dollars. I do agree with you about the cost of living, but many of the price hikes have been in areas where the government has intervened, from housing to healthcare to education. And I don't think we'll be in a disagreement here. If you look at things that are primarily market oriented, like consumer goods and automobiles, prices have flatlined or fallen. So it is the government and the Federal Reserve that are the cause of the increase in the cost of living. So why have a UBI if the government is at fault? Applying another layer of government will just lead to a greater cost of living. Overall, as I have stated from the very beginning, the UBI would only be suitable to the current system if it replaces everything we have today, which in its current form does not do. If the Yang Gang took a chainsaw and an axe to the welfare state, I'd apply for honorary membership and bore everyone to death with experts of Ludwig von Mises' human action. Thank you, Ryan. It was a pleasure speaking with you.